Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and welcome to another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from across ad tech, martech, and media. I'm Emmy Lederman. I'm an analyst at eMarketer, and today my guests will share how AI can help make sense of consumer shopping data and elevate each stage of campaign management in commerce media. So joining me is Samantha Bukowski, Global Head of Commerce at WPP Media, joining us from New Jersey. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Emmy.
And we have Valerie Mercurio, who is the SVP of Business Development at InfoSum, joining us from New York. Hi, Val.
Hey, Emmy. Great to see you again.
Thank you both for being here. And we would love to know where everyone else is tuning in from, so you can drop it in the chat. You can also use the chat to send in any questions. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can during the live Q&A at the second part of the show. So Val and Sam have a great presentation planned for you today. So with that, Sam, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in. We're super excited to have this presentation. I think first and foremost, we should probably level set what commerce is. Big word, a lot of different definitions, but we really think about commerce as the business of marketing. So today, as we're talking about commerce media and we're talking about how commerce signals can fuel everything in the marketing value chain end to end, you can think about this as a spectrum of everything ranging from retail and retail media all the way up to the way we think about broader purchase signals and intent signals all the way up the funnel. I spend all day, every day talking about this stuff, and I love it. And I just think that there's so much opportunity in this space now, and technology has unlocked so much for us. I think commerce signals at their core are one of the most rich, most diverse, most durable data sets that a marketer has access to today. So if you think about even just through retail partners and what they're able to bring to the table, we not only know what people are buying, right, or the cross-selling in their basket, we can extend into the types of entertainment and media that they're consuming, the way that they're searching, behaving, the context that they're doing that in, the geographies that they're taking these actions in. And so it's really one of the most powerful data sets that the modern marketer has access to. That being said, there are still quite a few challenges, right, in accessing it and how easy it is to move from an insight into an action. And so one of those just being the fragmentation. I don't think this is going to be news to anybody on this call for how much this has exploded in recent years. But even if you just think about the way that consumers experience media now, right, they're moving pretty effortlessly across surfaces, whether that be digital, in store and physical, the open web, social, in between walled gardens. And as they do that, the media and the signals about them continue to fragment. This really leads to a lot of disconnected data silos. What we hear a lot from brands as we're talking to them is it can kind of feel like they've never had access to more information and it's never been harder to make sense of it, right? Just because there's a lot of inconsistency, it's tied up behind a lot of walled gardens. And then you also have the element of data privacy and regulation. And as you're in different places in the world, this looks very different. There's also, I think, a lot of kind of paradigm shifting around how people are thinking about data collaboration these days. And we're having to kind of, experiment with maybe things we wouldn't have done a few years ago and kind of a new level of comfort with what it means to collaborate. And so all of these things together have created this world that's just full of opportunity. And I think brands and agencies know that, but it's also invited a lot of questions around what is the best and the easiest and the fastest and the most productive way to use all this information.
Awesome. And I think one of the big things, kind of, Sam, to your point, when you think about commerce, and I'm sure if you enter into a room with 10 different people from all different parts of the ecosystem, you're probably going to get 10 different answers in terms of what commerce means for them and for their business. And I will say that over the past 4 years and in my time at InfoSum, it has been the exact same thing in terms of data collaboration. We kind of went through this evolution as an industry where when InfoSum started building our technology, technology, it was really ahead of GDPR, right? It was how can we build a technology that empowers clients to leverage their first-party data without having to worry about exposure or leakage of that data. And it was that really foundational mission statement to the technology that we were building that we kind of branded as data collaboration. And we went through this kind of hyper growth of data clean rooms in the ecosystem. I'm sure many people on this call are familiar with them. And as those started getting defined, we kind of took a step back and we did a lot of introspective in terms of what do we want to do? And I think my guidance to teams who are looking at data collaboration to power a lot of parts of this ecosystem is really thinking about the use cases, right? Ultimately, it's where do you want to go as a business? What's the most important item to you? Is it monetizing your data? Is it extracting more value of first-party data? Is it working with partners that you didn't historically have access to? And that's where a technology partner like an InfoSum can really come into the middle to help expand via technology. And so when we take a step back and we think about data collaboration, it really has become a core part of the ecosystem. Again, 5 years ago, we weren't talking about it the way we do now. And so from our perspective, it's really thinking about seamless connectivity across the ecosystem. It's how can teams understand more? How can teams really connect? And I think a foundational layer is it should be a lot easier than I think some of the ecosystem has this nomenclature of like, oh, it's not as easy as it should be. There's a lot of build, a lot of setup. When you're working with the right partner, it really should be a one-to-many approach. So how can we help teams scale those use cases and that collaboration with a one-time setup? The second piece is really being able to build a diverse data set, right? Having more power by leveraging data sets that you didn't historically have access to. That's the common goal of what data clean rooms, data collaboration platform technology is empowering you to do. Teams, when we talk about walled gardens and everything kind of sitting outside of parties where they have no insight to that, data collaboration platforms really accelerate that growth for partners, and specifically in the commerce side, where you see all of these retailers spinning up their own solutions, which they absolutely, it is absolutely the right move. But then how do you also work across some of those ecosystems? And that's where technology being at the core accelerates that. The third pillar is really thinking about privacy as a strategic advantage. We work in an ecosystem where privacy has always been important, but I don't think it was ever the leader in terms of how teams leverage their data asset. And so when we think about the laws and legislation that has come down as we thought about cookie deprecation and everyone had to have this first-party data asset over the past few years, there's a lot of evolution, but it's really pushed privacy up in kind of the framework of what teams are looking for. I spend a lot of my day-to-day talking to legal counsels, talking to privacy and security teams, and just getting the teams a lot more comfortable with what technology can empower their marketers to be delivering at. And we need to think about it as an ecosystem to really build privacy by default. You should feel very comfortable on all of the use cases of how your data is being leveraged from start to finish. And lastly, we kind of move into a large piece of this and thinking about how can AI help us, right? When we think about AI, friend or foe, I get asked that a lot. AI is definitely a friend if leveraged appropriately. And if we kind of build on all of these different topics and we think about how much more value can we extract if we have control and how we bring that to light in the ecosystem. And so with that, I thought it would be really great to just kind of walk through some use cases of how we really see the evolution. Again, back to my basics, I always say I start small in terms of what are we trying to achieve together. Of course, we all want to fly, and it's, you're talking to new partners and it's just like agent to agent, right? That's the end goal for everyone. Let's kind of figure that out. But let's start with really tangible, actionable, meaningful items. And that all starts with data collaboration. It is as simple as bringing together retailers and media owners, brands and retailers, and building a safe environment where teams feel very confident. And all of this readily exists today. Again, InfoSum, we started building our technology about 10 years ago, ahead of GDPR, to really empower the average marketer to drive more value of what they were looking to do. And that's always where I tell people to get started, right? It doesn't have to be this big, daunting task. We can help you get understanding more about your first party data asset. And similarly, if you don't have a strong first party data asset, we can help you get insights by leveraging other partners without just getting flat files like the legacy way of thinking. And that's a really powerful step in the journey. The second is thinking about walk. It's how do I connect? How do I build a network? So when we think about collaboration, oftentimes it's more of a one-to-one. I will say when we think about choosing technology partners, it's important to think about a one-to-many solution, right? How do you set up an instance that you can leverage across multiple partners without it being a draining resource? And so when we move into Connect, it's now about building your ecosystem. Who are those champion partners that you want alongside of you for the journey? And how do we really build what we refer to as a private data network? How do we think about scaling that across multiple different partners? And again, you have access to multiple different use cases within there. You may be working with some partners just to generate insights. Where are we over indexing on certain campaigns? How are we driving more value that way? All the way through to actually executing and activating on some of those campaigns the teams are running. So thinking about that again, what's a very tangible step once you're comfortable with this nomenclature of collaboration to then move into building a bigger network that you really own and feel in control of from start to finish. The third pillar of this is like we're getting faster, right? We've been going, we started crawling, now we're walking, now we're ready to run. And running comes down to optimization. And as I get through these, we'll kind of go back to Sam, where she'll put a deeper commerce lens of how teams are thinking about this from that optimization process. I used to laugh oftentimes, teams, they're like, I need measurement. And it's like, okay, but what do you need, right? What are we trying to solve for? Are we trying to optimize campaigns? Are we trying to accelerate growth? Where does that really come from? And so when we think about the run phase from our lens, it's really about the optimization. It's how do we make sure that things are moving? How are we generating growth for our business? And how are we doing it in a scalable way? Which really leads us into that fly. And that is thinking about how are we leveraging AI more deeply to generate more insights. And I think our approach to AI, which we'll go through a little bit deeper in the next slide, is really thinking about where do we start? How do we really focus in on this core? And how do we leverage AI to understand more about data that exists to really scale that in a meaningful way? And that's, again, like that's the way that we think about it from a roadmap perspective. I never recommend just hopping right into fly. It's really getting comfortable with collaboration, getting comfortable with your technology vendor, and then scaling and accelerating those use cases as you deepen the journey together. And Sam, I would love to kind of hear your feedback as we think about it from a commerce lens of how you're working with partners to accelerate some of these.
Yeah, it was interesting inside baseball, but as Val and I were kind of putting this deck together, we're going back and forth because we're like, it depends who we're talking to, right? Because there's so many different use cases. So for those on the line, like you could be a brand manufacturer, you could be a retailer, you could be a technology platform, right? So this is going to look different depending on who you are, right? And what you need out of it. And so I would encourage, as we ask questions, right? From the viewpoint of the business that you're in and what you want to achieve. But I think if we kind of break it down and crawl, one, I think it's just even a step change in and of itself to have the first word here be collaborate, right? Like Val, we talk about this all the time in InfoSum, and like data collaboration kind of flows effortlessly, I think, off of our tongues, but it wasn't that long ago that we were stuck in like clean room world, right? And just even that like semantic shift is important because it really is different, right? Data collaboration is a different speed. It's a different gear when it comes to kind of intelligence. And so while it's kind of outlined here as crawl, there is a ton of power just in this first step, especially if you're a brand that doesn't have a lot of first party data, right? So I spend a lot of time talking to CPG and FMCG that just doesn't sit on a wealth of first party data, right? But they want the intelligence. They know where some of the intelligence is tied up. One, that's a place where you can lean on agencies, right? So like tap into the power of what we have underneath our hood, right? And then we can bring partners to that party and start to collaborate. Collaboration is all about kind of unveiling hidden opportunity, right? So things you wouldn't have otherwise known. This is where diverse data signals come in. So when you think about, like I kind of said on an earlier slide, when you have things like purchase affinity and propensities to buy and cross-shopping behavior and lifetime value and demographic information and geographic information, you start to collaborate with parties that both kind of have a variety of signals. Some really interesting things start to emerge, right? Things you wouldn't have otherwise known. And I think that's the power of collaboration. We find sometimes it feels like in marketing right now, everybody is like chasing the same things, playing in the same spaces. It's a lot of it being crowded. How do you cut through the noise? And so the point of collaboration is to find what's like your unique source of growth. Collaboration is what's going to tell you what that unique source of growth for you and your business could be, right? Then when you get into walk and you're talking about private data networks, this is where you're just kind of inviting more folks to the party and you're starting to like tune, if you will, the models to the uniqueness of your business. This is something that can be done on like an individual business level, but it's also something that we're thinking about from like a sector level. So there's certain like archetypes that are starting to emerge too, right? We've got every business is a beautiful, unique snowflake, but there are some similarities, right? And like what a CPG is going through versus what, health is going through versus auto versus beauty or specialty businesses, right? And so I think we can start to think about like how can data networks start to operate on behalf of common archetypes and kind of start us at a stronger base of intelligence, right? So it doesn't feel like we're starting from scratch solving for some of those similarities. Then when we think about optimization, this is an important, and this isn't necessarily linear either, right? I know we love like a 4-box slide, but a lot of this can be happening simultaneously. One of the biggest asks that I hear is, how do I take all of this intelligence and do something with it and collapse the amount of time in between those processes and validating that it actually worked? And it's easier said than done, right? Anyone that's telling you this is like, beautiful turnkey, we've always been able to do this. I think with the richness of the data that we have today, this has gotten so much more interesting in terms of the way that we think about optimization. First and foremost, like should have said this at the start, if you're still thinking about commerce in your head, if you're making that synonymous with like the word lower funnel, we're past it, right? Or commerce as a singularly retail media, still too narrow, right? I think commerce, again, is about the business signals that sit in marketing. And so when you start to bring those types of signals into marketing optimization, and frankly, that can be media, that can be creative, right? They can be a variety of things, is when you start to kind of bridge the gap between what's a marketing tactic, what's a business outcome, and how can we start to bring those things together. Flying, right? The kind of custom AI models are interesting, but this is where you take that optimization and you start to go not just from kind of the rapid optimization to a business signal, but really the predictive element of this. Another thing I hear a lot is how do we take what we've learned and put it back into our planning process automation, right? So not even just activation. This is where you can think about building kind of custom predictive impact models for your business, right? And for, large portfolios, this can be down to a brand level or a subcategory level, and start to know a whole lot more about what's going to happen before you ever put a dollar in market, right? It's a tough economy right now, right? I think what we hear from CMOs a lot is like, we've got to do more with less. every single penny of your investment is going to count. And so the more that we can move to kind of predictive solutions, the better off that we're going to be, the more responsible we're going to be with your investment, no matter what part of the P&L it's coming from. So again, it could be a million things for a million different people. Val, you made an excellent point about like knowing what you want out of this to some degree, right? Before embarking on it, or else I think there is a risk of trying to do everything or feeling like everyone must know something you don't, right? This is where it's going, so I must have to get involved. I think it's equally as important from a very human kind of perspective to stay very true to like what your business needs and what makes your business unique, what you're trying to solve for, and kind of plan a roadmap from there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the biggest things is I'm listening to you talk and I'm sitting here nodding my head like, yes, I definitely agree with that. I think the number one thing that I recommend to marketers is using the right tools in your toolkit that deliver a competitive edge for you. And I think that's like the number one thing. Well, maybe not the number one thing, but a very large part of AI is how do you leverage technology that has already existed to feel more in control and more empowered to then leverage and build that competitive advantage that's going to look different for every brand. And oftentimes, I work with marketers across the ecosystem, but I will say that I always come back to thinking about myself as a consumer and how I want to experience messaging and how I want to feel when I'm receiving that. And that is really kind of the core when we think about leveraging technology to help build that further. And so with that, we'll kind of move in as we're wrapping up on the slides, and then we would love to hear your questions and really be able to help frame and help dive deeper for anyone that's curious about some of this. But one of the big things, so WPP, we had announced earlier this summer about open intelligence. And I think when we really get under the hood, what it means is thinking about leveraging AI to deliver deeper intelligence, smarter decisions, and faster results. And that's really what it is at its core. I think there's a lot of noise in the market right now thinking about all of these different solutions. But again, kind of going back to what I said earlier, it's about helping our partners across the ecosystem, and partners means many different things. It's about helping our partners build those competitive advantages, leveraging privacy first technology and AI to really expand that. And when we think about open intelligence, it's really about becoming a data solution, right? It's what is your data solution? I started my career quite a bit ago, really focusing on offline data. And I always say, as someone who focuses now on privacy technology, I can't believe that I spent, the first few years of my career hand on keyboard working in Microsoft Excel, manually manipulating teams' data assets so that they could have more effective campaign strategies. And to see that we now have this world of technology and AI that can really help us accelerate those use cases, right? We can understand more quicker than ever with AI. And when leveraged correctly, it is just absolutely setting our partners up for success. And it's also just thinking about the fact that you can do so much more together. And that has really been a hard thing. I think over the years, a lot of parties really became centralized in terms of what's mine is mine. And now with these different opportunities, leveraging AI, it's how do we build that better together story where everybody wins? And I talk to partners day in and day out. And if anyone's on the line, you've probably heard me say this, but I always say I suffer from realism, right? It's really about helping my clients succeed. And I always say, I don't want to have a bunch of partners that come in and aren't leveraging the technology that we've built. So how do we start with those use cases and really deliver success together across the board? And commerce has been one of our most rapidly expanding areas of focus across the ecosystem, just in terms of generating new opportunities, things that we couldn't do historically because teams were holding things a little bit closer to the chest. And so now it's about that expansion of really focusing on delivering more value for the optimization and the growth of their business across the board.
Yeah. And I think hopefully one of the things that comes out of that is, sometimes I'll look at a slide like this, or I'll be presenting this and it's like, deeper, smarter, faster. And sometimes you can think about that sounds like complicated, or maybe harder. The other point of this is that it should become just so much easier. There's enough that's hard about being a marketer right now. This doesn't have to be one of them, right? So I think kind of breaking that paradigm of this sounds complicated, right? That sophistication must equal complexity. It's like, no, right? This should just make your life so much easier, no matter which side of the spectrum that you're sitting on. And you said something important about, which was like, I say triple win a lot. And it's creating triple wins. And sometimes we'll approach a conversation, there'll be one party at the table who comes into the conversation really feeling like they don't really understand what the value is for them, right? Or they feel like they're more of a provider, right, than they are getting something out of it. And what we've seen is that's not the case. So we have some results. We cherry picked 4. There's tons. I think these are some of the ones that are probably, the easiest to draw parallels from in terms of the marketing world we're transitioning from to the one we're transitioning to. But this can be even in the commerce world, right? Which is why I said it's not just about lower funnel or conversion or retail media. We're improving reach, right? Commerce people can still talk about reach. We got it, right? We get the whole funnel. We still know you have to reach people and everything has to scale, right? So I think it's about bringing better intelligence to the table, which is going to mean that you reach a greater percentage of your addressable universe, right? But then it's also, we can think about how are we driving activity in physical environments, right? So we talk a lot about how data collaboration can help us kind of outmaneuver competition at any touch point, right? So whether that be online, but also in store, we're seeing things like 2 times in-store sales lift, incremental revenue, incremental, word of the quarter, right? So brands deserve to know that this is actually driving the business forward, not through a vanity metric, right? But through a metric that is actually demonstrating that the needle's being moved. And so, a number like 28% incremental revenue is staggering, right? When you think about the types of growth that we're up against right now. And then like more efficiency plays, right? So cost per acquisition being down by 60%, right? These are really meaningful numbers, right? When it comes to folks who are, again, being asked to do more with less. And this can look different depending on the business that you're in, but it's really, really promising. And I just fundamentally believe when we look at all of the data that we have access to now and the role that commerce is going to play, there's a pretty significant shift going on. And at the risk of, overselling it, but I really believe this. You think about what digital was a couple of years ago, right? Where there was like specialists in digital and it was all about, that kind of niche in the corner. And then it became like core to the DNA of how the marketer operated, right? That's commerce, right? It's the richness of these signals. It's the business of marketing. It's the red thread between media and creative and production and strategy. And it's becoming quite foundational, I think, to data strategies and technology strategies moving forward. But again, this is like scratching the surface of a pretty big topic. So I'm sure there are questions and Val and I will do our best to answer them.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for the great presentation. Sam, I love what you said about commerce really having that association with lower funnel, but how it's super limiting to just think of it as a lower funnel play. And also, Val, your whole point about privacy was always part of the conversation, but it didn't necessarily lead the conversation. And now that's kind of a shift that marketers have to think about. Speaking of privacy, the first question that we have is how do data collaboration strategies differ when brands operate across multiple regions with very different privacy regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take that one. So I think one of the big things when we think about different privacy laws is all back to my original points, which is selecting the right type of technology vendor. And so any technology vendor that has truly built a data collaboration network and platform will allow you to scale across multiple regions. And I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle. We talk a lot and we think a lot about our global opportunities and thinking about how can we be leveraging different use cases across different markets. And InfoSum, we built our technology with the vision in mind for teams to be able to scale cross region. And that goes down to the security and the way that teams onboard data into the InfoSum ecosystem, in which it puts your data at full control. We work with some of the largest media owners across very regulated markets, and they have always found comfort knowing that they have the ability to really operate across multiple regions. And we really uphold our standards to be at the highest privacy regulation so that all of the other parties that are running a collaboration follow suit within that.
I'm going to add something, Val, that's like an adjacency to the privacy question around cross region. One of the things I think has been really powerful about collaboration technology like InfoSum and AI overall is it's kind of become like the great leveler in a sense to the differing maturity, I think, of some of these partners across the world. So recently I was in I sit in a global role, and I was in a conversation and I had colleagues from all over the world in North America and Europe at the table. And it was really this conversation about some of the work we'd just done with a partner in Europe in terms of commerce data collaboration and how we were extending all of that intelligence into all of these different media touch points. And there was this kind of sentiment of like, well, Europe's slightly less developed, right, in this space. And the US is sitting across the table and they're going, yeah, but we're different and we have this kind of different level of maturity over here. And then we had a look at it, right? What we were able to do. And it was like, well, hold on a second. Didn't know you do that in Europe, right? All of the sudden, because when you approach that kind of opportunity from the lens of, no, let's think like fundamentally differently about how we get information out of this data. It doesn't have to move, right? In a sense, there's a lot less legwork. We are not asking partners to develop massive infrastructure for data sharing. We're not asking them to hire teams of people to facilitate it and to pour capital into these big, bulky solutions. We're actually saying we can help raise the level of maturity pretty rapidly, right? In markets where historically we maybe would have had to have waited, right? For them to kind of follow a spectrum. And so I think that's one of the cooler things about the cross-market opportunity here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of tack on that, one more thing that I was thinking when you were just talking is also giving our teams a lot of flexibility. So one of the big items for InfoSum is we didn't build our technology on top of an identity spine. And we did that really, really tactically. And what it allows for cross markets is it gives our clients full control over which partners they want to leverage to build those private data networks. And I think that's a really key piece of the strategy, because it does allow them to all of a sudden accelerate different use cases across different markets. And you can see that same impact really driving forward across the board.
Definitely.
Another big topic that we had was just, as I mentioned, kind of getting full funnel value out of commerce media. This question is, commerce media is often tied to sales and conversions. How can brands use AI and collaboration to also influence upper funnel outcomes?
Well, thanks whoever asked that, because clearly we're on the same page. I think that, at the risk of kind of repeating myself, I'd love to use a tangible example. Same example I was just kind of talking through in terms of our European collaboration that we did recently for a few brands. The question we get asked a lot is, how do I bring the rigor of commerce intelligence to the entirety of my marketing value chain? And that sounds like fluffy, but it is a legitimate question we get asked, right? I think when you get exposed to the richness and the diversity of the types of data signals that you're going to get back from a commerce partner, everyone goes, whoa, this is amazing. How can I use it though? It doesn't just feel like it's valuable in a lower funnel activity. It feels like it's valuable everywhere. And the answer is, of course, what we've done a lot of recently, and we have some press releases out on this, and so it's public information, but we're pulling all of those signals into full funnel media. So I would say CTV is a big one, especially in the US. We get asked a lot about like, how do we bring those signals into CTV without paying a massive premium, right? Because we also know that with the richness of commerce signals can come also an altered price tag. Because frankly, it is premium data. But I think what we are starting to do is kind of crack the code on like breaking that barrier down and pulling it upstream. Thematically, I also hear a lot in Europe in particular about wanting to leverage it in social, which we've done. The results there have been outstanding in terms of leveraging the commerce data signals. And this isn't just in campaigns that the primary KPI is sales, right? This is in campaigns that, again, can be just extending reach, or they can be brand equity focused, or they can be, consideration focused. But because they're starting out on such a stronger base of intelligence and the targeting is so much more tuned to real behavior and real intent signals, it's kind of like a rising tide raises all ships. So there's really nothing that isn't applicable at this point in this world. But I will say, because I do come from commerce, at the end of the day, when you step back and you're measuring everything in aggregate, got to get sales and share.
Love it. Val, anything to add there?
No, I mean, I think Sam is definitely the master of her craft on this, but I do think one of the big things, as we think about that funnel and where things sit, when we think about signal loss, I think one of the big pieces is being able to collaborate with, other brands, other partners in that same sector. And that is just something that's brand new, I think, to the ecosystem over the past few years that we're really enabling across the board.
So more of a AI-centric question. This one is, how often should teams actually revisit or update AI models for media targeting?
Good one.
That is a good one. Yeah, I think
my answer is it varies, but you go, Val.
no, exactly that. I mean, I think at its core, right, teams need to be very aware, and I've seen such a shift from security teams, just of the level of expertise that, these teams have in terms of AI. And I think where it starts is you need to be in full understanding of what is being leveraged via AI. And that's really at its core. Is once you have an awareness, once you have an understanding as a business, you are aligned for what is being leveraged, then you can kind of accelerate. And it depends on exactly what the outcome of those models is doing. And that's where I think, I mean, we're at a stage where every time I'm logging into a new platform, there's a new capability. So I would say right now, like probably pretty regularly, that you need to be revisiting. And my assumption is that a lot of the teams are regularly monitoring what the outcomes of these models are. But there's definitely, I'm certainly no expert when it comes to that. But that would kind of be my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, you can email us if we want to talk more about this, but I think it does actually depend. Like any good model, I think there's an initial kind of ramp up time to any of this, right? And so you've got to get to kind of a rhythm in the beginning. So there's always going to be kind of that initial ramp up. I think there's similarities again in like the archetypes of client type, and it also depends on the speed of the signals the AI is learning from, right? Which can be different. So if we're thinking about like multi-party collaboration and you're thinking about that kind of federated approach to learning, you're going to have a lot of different signal speeds happening in the individual data sets. And so one of the best barometers, I think, is kind of starting there. But it really is kind of becoming quite rapid, especially when you get to like that part of the framework with kind of the automation loop. I'd say that there's really kind of a rapid learning element going on where there's an instantaneous kind of component to it. So everything that Val said, that's what I would tack on to that one.
Awesome. And this is a nice kind of looking forward question to end our webinar with. But commerce media is evolving at a rapid rate. If we were to fast forward 2 to 3 years from now, what do you think will have changed the most? And what new challenges and opportunities do you think marketers will face?
Oh my gosh, the $1 million question. Um, I will say commerce is everybody's job. It already is, but I think we'll see that even more. I think the shape of what we now know to be retail media networks will be dramatically changed. I think that will be because of the AI revolution, not just in the way we think about data collaboration, but in the way that AI is impacting everything. The way we think about even just consumers visiting websites, where traffic is going on the internet, how large language models and personal agents are going to accelerate, how shopping is going to fundamentally change. That is going to reshape businesses from pretty much the ground up. I think it's really exciting. I think there's already great steps being taken to plan for that future. Data collaboration is going to be right in the center of that entire shift, right? Like it becomes the kind of heartbeat of intelligence in that world. And I think it starts to get far more interesting and democratized as like true overall marketing and not just media. So commerce being such a vast, capability, extending not just in paid spaces, but owned spaces and earned spaces and all of the signals we're getting from that. I think we're going to see kind of this kind of world building philosophy kind of take hold moving forward. I could do an hour and a half webinar just on world building. So I would say commerce becomes everybody's job. Shape of what we know to be retail media dramatically shifts to be far more about intelligence and less about supply differences. And that data collaboration sits at the heart of the AI revolution, becoming the intelligence layer to how people behave in this new digital world.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, just from my perspective, it's also just the speed and the amount of access to data is just increasing at such a rapid rate because of, different data collaboration tools and things that exist that are at our fingertips, plus AI. And I think that when we think about that from a fundamental data connectivity standpoint, there is just this massive acceleration. And back to my earlier example, where I always think about myself as a consumer, like I'm really excited to see what brands and retailers end up doing in terms of understanding so much deeper about the things that we are purchasing and how we're purchasing them, and really getting, quite creative. AI is just this enabler to move more quickly, to build more content, and to really personalize that experience. And it all starts with that data asset.
Love it. Well, I think that's a great way to end. Sam and Val, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing this great content and answering all of our audience questions. We really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you about eMarketer's media channels. Don't miss eMarketer's next summit on November 14th, CTV and streaming advertising trends for 2026. Secure your spot, register for more webinars like this one, and subscribe to our newsletters, all at emarketer.com. Catch Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, and the Banking and Payments Show on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Keep an eye on your email for the link to today's playback, and of course, feel free to contact us if you have any other questions. Thank you all for your time, and thanks again to Sam, Val, the team at InfoSum, and the eMarketer studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all at our next Tech Talk.